Hi guys, it's Kara with Grains of Small Places, and today I wanted to share with you, I've been kind of inspired to make some cinnamon swirl bread. So today I'm going to make a sandwich bread, basically an everyday sandwich bread with fresh milled flour, and then I'm going to make one sandwich bread loaf and one cinnamon swirl loaf bread. And then at the end of the video, I'm going to share with you 3 tips on how to make that cinnamon swirl bread turn out perfectly every time, because I know sometimes you can get a big separation or it all melts and doesn't bake properly. So I'm going to share with you just 3 tips at the end for the cinnamon swirl bread. So let's get started. So today we're going to be going down to my parents' house for a little grill out because it's beautiful out today. So I'm going to go ahead and grab some butter out of the refrigerator. That way I can make some cookies to take down and share with everybody. So I'll probably go ahead and just show you a little bit on that. I have the recipe. I've already made the kind I'm going to make before. It's going to be a double chocolate with white chips. As long as I can find some white chocolate chips in my pantry, then we'll go ahead and make that kind. So I'll show you what we end up making. Just going to grab some butter and just stick it on the counter. That way those are ready to go when I want to cream my butter and sugar for the cookies. Okay, to start out with milling the flour, I'm going to use about 2 cups of hard white wheat and about 2/3 cup of kamut, just because I like the combination that the flavors bring, and I'm still able to form nice gluten for a nice fluffy bread. So this is going to weigh about 485 grams, and it should yield me about 4 cups of fresh milled flour or so. So I'm just going to weigh this on my little scale, and then we will go ahead and take it to our Nutrimill Harvest grain mill and mill that. And I'm using my flour mill. I'm going to tighten the top here, and then I'm going to pour the wheat berries in here. And then I like to go and tighten it one more time, because when the wheat berries go in, the stones start to separate. So to get fine flour, I like to tighten it one more time. And then I'm going to go ahead and grab my wet ingredients. So I'm going to put in my milk, my butter, and water, and then I'm going to heat it in the microwave. You could do this over the stove if you prefer, but the microwave is really quick. And I want to make sure in the microwave what happens is the butter melts all the way and the milk starts to almost scald. So not boil. We don't want the milk to boil, but just scald. And this changes the proteins in the milk. That way we don't have any problems. If I pour the milk into my bread dough cold, it stops the gluten development. So I want to make sure that we do heat the milk thoroughly before we put it into our mixture. I'm using 1 cup of water, 3/4 cup of milk, and about 3 tablespoons of butter. I like to chop the butter in little pieces so they melt faster. And as you can see, I accidentally put the butter in first, but I wanted to use this to measure, so I just took it out and put it in another vessel or another bowl. That way I could measure out my milk and my water, then put the butter in and microwave it. And now you can see the butter is not completely melted, so I'm just going to keep doing this for about 30 seconds in the microwave each time until the butter is completely melted and the milk starts to steam a little bit, but again, not boil. And now I'm going to go ahead and put 1.5 teaspoons of salt into this mixture. And I'm going to use 3 tablespoons of raw cane sugar. You could use honey if you prefer, or whatever sweetener that you like to use. And I'm going to give that a mix, and it should start to dissolve the sugar and salt just a little bit. Now we want to make sure that we don't kill our yeast by having this liquid too hot. So what I do is I mix all of this together, and then I let my flour sit with the wet ingredients before I even put the yeast in. That way I don't have to worry that I'm going to kill my yeast. Because if I were to just throw all this together, put the yeast in with this temperature, it would just kill the yeast and I would have no rise. All right, I'm going to grab my mixer here and my mixing bowl and my kneading paddle. Okay, and in goes all the wet ingredients. I want to make sure that I scrape everything out of here. I use my little mini spatula here so I can make sure I get all the salt and sugar out that didn't dissolve. That way it won't mess with my recipe proportions. I suppose I could have poured in the liquid ingredients and then added the salt and sugar into the mixing bowl, but I didn't think of that today. And now I'm going to just crack 1 egg into my bowl here. Now, egg naturally contains lecithin, and some recipes will call with fresh milled flour to add in either sunflower lecithin, or there's several different kinds, but there are some recipes that call for that. And if it does, you could always add in an extra egg instead of adding that in. When I first began my fresh milled flour journey, I used it just because I thought I was supposed to. And here is the beautiful fresh milled flour. But I started realizing I didn't really like the taste that it gave, and I figured if I'm making my own bread, why add in extra ingredients that I'm trying to avoid by buying it from the store? So I decided let's try to find a better way with natural ingredients to make our bread. And I had to chop up the egg a little bit. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and dump in my flour here. Now, I know that this recipe works for me, so I'm just dumping it all in. If you want to hold off a little bit and just make sure that you don't need to add some later or get the proportions right, that's fine. You don't have to dump it in all at once. This is probably a big no-no for most bakers. I just know that I've made this so many times that I can always mill a little more if I need more. I can always add a little bit more water if I need to add a little bit more water. And I'm going to go ahead and start on a slow just to let all of these ingredients incorporate together. I want to mix it until there's no dry flour showing. And again, I haven't put in the yeast, so I don't have to worry about killing it at this point with the temperature. So once there's no dry flour showing and everything seems to be combined, I'm going to cover this and let it sit for about 15 minutes or so. If you forget about it and it sits for 2 hours, that's fine. This will allow for the fresh milled flour to absorb some of that liquid before we start kneading it to form the gluten. Okay, now that that has been sitting for about 15 minutes or so, I'm going to take off this and set it to the side so I can use it later. And I'm going to put in 2 teaspoons of instant yeast, and then I'm going to start mixing it around. Now, by this time, my mix should have cooled down, so I don't have to worry about it overheating the yeast. But if you would like to check the temperature before you pour in your yeast just to make sure, then you can do that as well. I do have another sandwich bread recipe that I have on my blog, and I use it very often, and it works for vegan recipes or vegetarian recipes also. Or even when I just need to hit up the grocery store, and I make it without eggs or milk, so it's a pretty simple recipe. And I will put a link to that here as well in case you're interested in that sandwich bread recipe. Both of these sandwich bread recipes make very lovely, nice, and soft, squishy sandwich bread as long as you knead it long enough to get that window pane. I do have a whole video on the window pane, what it is, how to master it, and troubleshooting it if you don't get it. I will try to remember to put a link to that for you as well. It's in my YouTube channel. Also, I have a blog on it if you prefer to read about it. So you can head over to grainsandsmallplaces.net to find the information on the window pane if you prefer that method. And I will show you when this dough gets to the window pane stage, what it looks like, and how I know. I'll just give you a little glimpse of it when we get there. And oftentimes I do have to scrape down the sides and just kind of reconfigure all the dough here and put my mixer back down in there when I think I'm getting close to the end, and it just helps top it off. I don't know the science behind that. It just seems to help. So that's also a tip for you. You can always take it off your paddle and just pull it around to reincorporate, because I think that the gluten tends to form a little bit better down at the bottom rather than the top. So if I just mix it around, put it back in my mixer, it usually only takes maybe a few more minutes, and then I have my nice stretchy gluten. Let's see how it's wanting to ball up here. It's getting smoother. That's how I know it's just about ready to test for the window pane test. It's not breaking as often when it's kneading around, so I can kind of see if I'm going to get, an okay window test or not just by looking as it's kneading and looking at the texture of the dough. So I'll probably check it here in maybe a minute or two. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and check it because I can see the dough is looking smooth. I'm gonna get my hands wet, or one of my hands wet, because that helps it to not stick as much. So I can see right here that the dough is looking stretchy. Let me get my hands wet a little bit better. The dough is looking stretchy and it's not breaking, so I'm getting a successful window pane. Now that we have a successful window pane, I'm going to just use that same piece of cling film there and cover this up and let it sit for about an hour until the dough looks like it's doubled in size. I'm just going to leave it on my counter back behind me here, and while this is rising, I'm going to go ahead and just mix up the filling really quick. Okay, and since I am only doing one cinnamon swirl bread and one sandwich loaf bread, I'm going to make half the amount of filling. So I'll show you what I do. But if you want to make 2 of the cinnamon swirl breads, you're going to want to follow the recipe in the description box below. That will have enough to make both loaves of the filling. If you just want to make one, just half the filling amount. So let's go ahead and mill just a little bit of flour. That way we can add it to our filling. I'm just using soft white here, and I'm trying to do this one-handed. So I'm just going to use probably about a tablespoon. If you're making the double loaf, you'll do a double tablespoon. Pour that right in and tighten that top here to give us more fine flour. And you can hear the sound of it. It's a little bit loud, but it's not awful. And that's all I milled, so I'm just going to loosen that back up and turn it off. And I just got this little, let me see if I can, just this little amount here. I may not even use that whole amount. I'm just going to put that in with my filling with my cinnamon and brown sugar. So let me show you how I do that. Okay, so because I'm using a half a recipe of the filling, because I'm only making the one, I'm going to do a 1/4 cup of brown sugar instead of the half a cup. And I'm going to put in, I'm still probably going to put in about 2 tablespoons of this fresh milled flour. So you're going to want to do 2 heaping tablespoons, probably this whole amount here, if you're doing the regular double amount. And then I'm going to add the cinnamon. And that's going to be about a tablespoon of cinnamon. And I like to use the Ceylon cinnamon because it is the cinnamon that has all of the antioxidants and nutritional properties. But you can use any cinnamon that you prefer. I just have to take the little lid off here. This is actually different cinnamon. I buy this in bulk. Here it is. I buy this in bulk at my local, I have like a little Amish store nearby when I'm in Ohio, so I always stock up on my spices and different baking goods because I really love the quality that they have. But I've also used this brand as well, and I can link this in the description box below or something similar to this. That way you can try it out for yourself. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and just get a tablespoon of that. And again, if you're making 2 loaves, you'll want to double this. And I love these little measuring spoons because they fit right into my jar, even the tablespoon. So, oops. I can link those below too if you're interested. Alright. And I actually probably will go ahead and just put a little dash of salt in this just to balance the sweetness. Like, not very much. And you can omit that if you prefer. I just like to do that. So we've got our flour in here, which will help absorb as the bread bakes. The liquids start to absorb into the sugar here, and it turns liquidy, and that's why oftentimes you'll have huge separations in your dough. In fact, as I'm looking at this, I think I may go ahead and just add in the rest of that flour that we milled. So just use your best judgment. You want it to obviously not taste like flour, but that flavor will bake out in the baking. But you want it to be able to be in there enough to absorb any of the sugar liquids as they start to bake. Okay, so I'm just gonna set this to the side and then I'll show you how we put this in. So as you can see, the roof has been roofed. Matt was able to actually hire in a roofer for that because that was something that was going to take him a lot longer, but he did frame up all of the roof structure and put in all the peaks and valleys, so we just hired somebody to put the shingles on basically. And Matt has the windows installed and put the little house wrap on here, and now he's starting on the electric. And he's got the power put into a lot of these outlets and the ceiling fan ready for the bathroom vent, and cut in the hole for the toilet. Is that for the sink? Drain for the sink. The windows he's got insulated and installed completely in. So next up is insulation and finish the plumbing, and then he'll start with the drywall. Okay, so now that our dough has doubled, I'm going to pull this off here, and I did forget to spray this with oil, as you can see, which before I forget to do that, I'm going to just put some oil on my mat here. Put my hands in there a little bit. It's okay that we forgot to spray with oil. It'll be fine. Just kind of push that down. I also, while I was doing other things, let this overproof. So hopefully we won't have any issues with that. But look at all the fiber gluten strands. That is amazing in there. I hope you can see that. All of those fiber strands that we built during all of the kneading. Okay, looks like it's going to be fine. Normally I would reuse this little piece of cling film, but since it's got this dough all over it, then it's going to make it pretty difficult to use again. Alright, so I'm just going to put a little bit of oil on both my hands here. Consolidate my dough. You can see how nice and stretchy it is. A little piece there, just stick it in. Okay. And I'm going to divide my dough in half. You can weigh it if you want exact measurements, but just a guesstimate's usually fine here. And I'm going to set half of this aside to make my cinnamon swirl bread. And then this one's going to be just my sandwich bread. And I'm just going to kind of flatten it out and get the air bubbles out here. And I like to shape it many different ways. Today I think I'm just going to go with the just going to kind of pull some surface tension down from the top, and as I'm doing that you can see the bread kind of stretch here a little bit. And then I'm just going to set that in my loaf pan while we get ready for our cinnamon bread. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and use, this is what we heated the milk and butter up when we made the dough for my little egg here. And let me wash my hands real quick. So we're just going to beat that. I'm going to add just a tad bit more oil here. Because I like to work with my dough sticky, I like to use oil. I could use flour here. This mat would probably be fine with regular bread without having an issue, but I like to use the oil because it doesn't stick to my hands I can work with a wetter, stickier dough, which I find fresh milled flour does much better if it is wetter and stickier to work with. So let me just flatten this out, kind of like you're gonna make a cinnamon roll, I guess. But we're gonna turn this into a loaf. And that's all we need to do for our regular sandwich bread. So you could use the recipe here and make 2 loaves of sandwich bread if you want, or 1 loaf of each, or do all kinds of interesting things with this dough. It's a great basic recipe. I'm going to use my little brush here, and a lot of times people would use butter here, but what butter does is butter will, when I'm in here, just like what it does in puff pastry and crescent rolls and things like that, it makes things puff apart. So we obviously don't want that to happen, because that's how we get the cinnamon swirls to kind of leave gaps when we're making them. So it took me a little while to realize and troubleshoot that that's what the issue was, but I found that when I use an egg wash, I don't have that issue anywhere near as bad, and it helps everything to stick together. So I'm going to just apply this egg wash. If you would like to add nuts or raisins, you could do that into this filling mixture. Sometimes I like to add raisins in there. Just really depends on what I have on hand and what we feel like. Because taking this and adding raisins in the cinnamon swirl bread, so it's a cinnamon raisin swirl, is so good if you slice it and use it as like a piece of toast, especially in the morning. That's really delicious. Quick, easy little snack or breakfast. Okay, so this was just 1 egg. I'm going to save this because I can turn this into an egg wash for the top of my loaf. And this is the filling that I made. And I know that I had said that I halved this recipe, but now looking at it, we'll see how far that goes. Because I did add that extra flour, but I think we're going to get it all in there. I'm going to make it fit, because who doesn't love a little extra cinnamon, brown sugar, goodness in there. Okay, so I'm going to take this close to the edge, but not all the way to the edge. Already the cinnamon is smelling so good. I'll make sure to post a link to this recipe down in the description box below. That way you can print it off and you don't have to try to write down everything as I'm saying it. Okay, I'm just gonna, nothing better than just working with your hands, right? So I'm just gonna kind of press this down in there one more time. Don't want to get too much of the cinnamon sugar mixture on my hand so that it doesn't get all over the outside of my bread. But I do like to push it in here, and then while I'm doing that, I actually can make this a little bit larger. It gives me more leverage to push out some more of those air bubbles in there. So just going to start rolling really small here. And we want to make it kind of tight, because that's another issue. Oh, it didn't get tight there. I'll just pull it and roll it, because when it's not tight, that is another issue of the separation. So as you can see, I'm pulling it and rolling it, but I'm not making it so tight that there's no room for it to rise. So it's kind of a, have to find that balance. Just gonna kind of spread this one out here so it comes all the way to my edges. Okay. Okay, so I can see a few places here got really thin. We'll see how that goes. I'm not sure if that will be an issue. It may end up breaking through, or it may end up being perfectly fine. I get a little bit of a different result every single time I make this bread. So I do see a little bit of air under the dough here, if you can see while I'm pushing it. I'm just gonna kind of try to squeeze some of that out while I'm pulling on here, and I don't really want to break that through, but I have a feeling it might. But that's okay if it does. Okay, and I'm just going to pull these ends under and then place that in my loaf pan here. Gonna give it just a little push here so it evens out in my pan. Okay, and then I'm gonna go ahead and cover these. I'm gonna let this sit because I'm gonna use this to egg wash the top of my loaf to give it a nice shiny golden hue. So let me cover that and then we'll let it sit for about a half an hour. All right, we're gonna cover that. And you know what? I didn't learn my lesson. I'm gonna spray that with some oil and then cover it. Spray that with some oil. Now, I'm going to cover that. And let it rise. Towards the end of my rise, I'm going to go ahead and preheat my oven to about 400 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, and I'm just going to kind of roll this up and dump it in my sink so that we can wash it. I really like having this mat. It's nice and handy. It will help protect my table. As you can see, it's seen better days, but it's nice, easy cleanup as well. Okay, I'll be back. Okay, they've doubled in size. So now we're going to bake them. Even though they're the same dough and roughly the same size, they're going to bake at 2 different times, but the same temperature. So I'm going to just apply this egg wash to them. And you don't have to put this egg wash on your loaf if you don't want to. I just am doing it because I already had it from the inside part. So it could just make a nice brown and shiny top. All right, in they go. For 20 to 25 minutes for the first loaf, and the second loaf will have to bake a little longer. Okay, so while that's baking, I'm gonna go ahead and take advantage of me being in the kitchen, and I'm gonna get started on those cookies. That way we have those ready to go for tonight. So to do these cookies, we're going to need 320 grams of wheat berries. And I'm going to use soft white wheat. Okay, and I will go ahead and mill this fine. Okay, it's me milling here one-handed. Sometimes I spill when I do this, so I'm gonna go ahead and just turn that on, tighten it a little bit, add in my grains. Let me bring you in closer. So this is, I just take these off here, and then I will tighten it as it's milling a little bit more. So I hear that little ticking sound, and then it gives me finer flour. Back it off just a little, that might have been too much. It gives me finer flour. Okay, and I can hear it's done, so I'm gonna just loosen it back up and turn it off. And when I remember, I put the lid back on. And now we have our flour for our cookies. All right, and here is our beautiful fresh milled flour from soft white wheat, and to that, I'm going to add 2/3 cup of cocoa powder, and this is another thing I like to buy in bulk at my local Amish store because they have the best cocoa powder. Okay, so 2/3, about 1/3. You can see the rich color of this cocoa powder too. I just love this stuff. I always try to find some from the just regular store, and I never quite like it. It's too acidic, or I don't know what's wrong, but this is the best cocoa powder. I wish I could link it below, but I can't because it's just from a local Amish store. I'm just going to set that there. I'm going to add a teaspoon of baking soda. and a half a teaspoon of salt. And I'm just gonna stir that around. Make sure there's no clumps in my cocoa powder. I guess I could have sifted it, but I generally don't have an issue. Okay, that looks good. I'm going to set this to the side, and then we're going to start creaming our butter and sugar. So I'm going to grab my other bowl here for that, and my cookie paddle. And remember, I grabbed that butter out earlier. So sometimes I like to put it in my oven on the proofing function as well, so that's nice and soft. Gonna do 2 sticks or 1 cup. And we made these cookies together, I think, for Valentine's Day, but today I'm going to use half white chocolate chips and half milk chocolate chips, just to give it a little different flavor. Either semi-sweet, oh wait, they are semi-sweet chips. Okay, because I don't want to dirty up another thing, I need 2/3 cup of white sugar, so I'm just going to use this here, but I don't really want to dip it into my sugar. This is probably not accurate measuring, but you know, whatever works, right? Okay, 2/3 cup of regular sugar, or I like to use raw cane sugar. And then 3/4 of a cup of packed brown sugar. And we're going to go ahead and beat that together until it becomes light, fluffy, and creamy, and it will start to turn a lighter color. It'll take a few minutes. And I'll come back to you when it's done. And I think I'll use my Christmas spatula today, even though it's May. And you're probably going to need to scrape the sides down at least 1 time, if not a couple times. But you can see when you do that, that it's not all the way incorporated, it's different colors. So I'll probably do this 2 or 3 times. A teaspoon of vanilla. I like to make my own homemade vanilla, which you can check that out in the description box below. I'll post a link or put a card here somewhere. Okay, and then we're going to add our 2 eggs to this. You can see how light and fluffy and airy this is getting. Okay, sorry about that. My battery went dead on you, but now that the eggs are incorporated, it's all mixed throughout and light and fluffy, we can add in our flour cocoa powder mixture here. And I'm just going to put that all in. And I'm going to slowly turn the mixer on because I've accidentally done it on fast before and made a big mess. Turn it up a little once it starts to get incorporated there. And then I am going to scrape the sides so that it is mixed all throughout. As you can see, it needed that because it was not mixed throughout. Okay, that looks pretty good. Then I'm going to put the mix-ins in, and this is where you can be creative if you want to put whatever you want in here. I have tried several things, like you've seen the M&Ms, you've seen the chocolate chips in there, or that's what we're going to be doing today. I've tried Andy's mint pieces and made like a grasshopper cookie. Those were delicious. I've tried peanut butter chips in here, all kinds of different mixing options. Nuts you can try. But today, I'm going to do probably about a half a bag of white chocolate chips and a half a bag of, they are semi-sweet chocolate chips. So half and half. And these 2 half bags were actually left over from the last time I made it, which these were a hit, so figured we could make them again and share the love. I'm gonna mix that on slow, or number 1, low. All right, that doesn't take very long to mix those in. Let's get that cookie dough out of the paddle here. And these are ready to scoop out, and you can either scoop them and put the cookie balls in the freezer here. You could let this dough sit in the fridge if you want, or you can just go straight to baking them. I'm gonna shove that to the side, and we can start scooping the cookies. So I'm just gonna line my pan with parchment paper and use my cookie scoop, and these are gonna bake for 350 degrees for about 9 minutes or so. Now let's check in on that bread. Okay, we're going to temp the regular loaf. Just at 190, and we're going to temp this loaf. As you can see how much lower that is. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this loaf out. Okay, so I just pulled this out of the oven, and I want to take it out pretty much right away. You can see how it's nice and brown, maybe a little too dark for some of you, but I also only have my tiny little toaster oven, so it always is close to the top. But I'm going to take it right out of here so that the condensation doesn't get wet. Ooh, it's still hot. Doesn't make the loaf all wet, and I'm going to let that cool down, and I'm going to wait about 5 to 10 minutes for the other loaf. Okay, here's our cinnamon swirl bread. It did rip like I was concerned about because I had it so thin there, but that's okay. It'll still taste delicious. Let's temp this, baby. Alright, I'm happy with that. It's just about at 190, and it was in for about 6 extra minutes. So let's pull this one out and let it cool hot before we slice into those. And I'll let you see how we did with the swirl when we get there. It's swirled! Slicing a loaf each time is kind of like Christmas because I get a different result each time, and I love taking a look at all the air pockets and how it looks. It's always such a surprise. Okay guys, thanks for sticking around to the end if you made it this far. So those 3 tips for the cinnamon swirl, if you saw, I used an egg wash on the inside to put my cinnamon and brown sugar mixture in instead of butter, because butter, when it bakes, it will expand and make those swirls come apart from you. So the egg wash helps that stick. The second tip is going to be to add some flour into your sugar mixture, and that helps absorb any extra liquids and fluids. That way it won't separate on you. And then the third tip is, since I made both for you today, I think you saw one had to take longer than the other. So it bakes much longer, even though it's the same bread recipe and it's the same size and everything. It bakes longer when you add the cinnamon sugar swirl inside. So I hope those 3 tips helped you. And don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, share with your friends. And thank you for stopping by Grains in Small Places. Goodbye.